You don't dare raise your voice at me. 8 words. That's all it took to shatter 400 years of absolute power. 8 words spoken by a woman in faded scrubs, standing before a creature who had watched kingdoms crumble to dust while he remained unchanged. 8 words that should have ended with my blood decorating the hospital floor. Instead, they became the beginning of something that would burn us both alive. Welcome, welcome, welcome to this story. If you've ever stood your ground when everything in you screamed to run, if you've ever felt that strange electricity when danger meets something deeper, then stay with me. Subscribe, and let's begin. The fluorescent lights of Rhode Island Hospital flickered at 2:47 a.m., casting pale shadows across the overcrowded emergency ward. The air hung thick with a metallic scent of blood, antiseptic, and something else, something my rational mind refused to name. That particular cocktail of smells that only existed in places where life and death held hands in the darkness. I hadn't slept in 23 hours. My name is Layla Hutchinson, and I had been a night shift nurse for 16 years. Not because I loved the chaos, though I was good at it, but because the chaos kept me from thinking, kept me from remembering, kept me from feeling the empty space on the left side of my bed where Jonah used to sleep. 15 years. 15 years since I held his hand while the monitors flatlined. 15 years since the doctors shook their heads and used words like unknown etiology and rare blood disorder, and we're so sorry. 15 years of working the same shift where he died, as if keeping vigil in the fluorescent purgatory of the ER could somehow undo what couldn't be undone. I was 38 years old, and I had made peace with the fact that the best part of my life was already behind me. Or so I thought. Hutchinson. The charge nurse's voice cracked across the ward like a warning shot. Room 7. VIP admission. Administration wants him handled personally. I felt my jaw tighten. VIP. In a hospital overflowing with broken bodies and desperate families, someone with money had jumped the line. I grabbed a fresh chart and walked toward room 7, my worn sneakers silent against the linoleum. Through the curtain, I could see a silhouette, broad shoulders, impossible stillness. The kind of stillness that made the animal part of my brain whisper wrong, wrong, something is wrong. I pulled back the curtain, and the world shifted. He sat on the examination table like it was a throne. Pale, impossibly pale, as if sunlight had never touched his skin. A suit that cost more than my car, charcoal gray, perfectly tailored. Dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble by a sculptor who understood that beauty and danger were the same thing. But it was his eyes that stopped me cold. Amber. Ancient. Wrong in ways I couldn't name, but felt in my blood like a warning from ancestors I'd never known. He looked at me the way a predator looks at something it's deciding whether to eat.
Finally, he said.
His voice was low, cultured, carrying an accent I couldn't place. Something old, something European, something that made me think of candlelit halls and centuries of power. I've been waiting for 19 minutes. I glanced at the chart. Curtis Marshall. Laceration, left hand. No medical history on file. Payment, private. Mr. Marshall, I said, keeping my voice professionally neutral, I apologize for the wait. As you may have noticed, we're dealing with multiple critical. I don't care. He stood, and I realized how tall he was. 6'3", maybe 6'4". He towered over me, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Do you have any idea who I am? His voice rose, filling the space, seeping through the curtain into the ward beyond. Do you understand what I could do to this hospital? To your career? To. And something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the 23 hours without sleep. Maybe it was 15 years of grief compressed into a single moment of absolute fury. Maybe it was the memory of Jonah, who died in this exact hospital while administrators worried about donor relations and VIP treatment protocols. Maybe it was simply that I had stopped being afraid of monsters a long time ago. I stepped closer, close enough to smell something beneath his expensive cologne, something cold, something ancient, something that made my blood sing with recognition I didn't understand. I raised my hand. I pointed my finger directly at his face. You don't dare raise your voice at me. The entire ward went silent. Not quiet silent. The kind of silence that has weight. The kind that feels like the world holding its breath before everything changes forever. In his eyes, those ancient, amber eyes, I watched something flicker.
Shock.
Yes. But underneath it, something else. Hunger. And in that moment, standing before a creature I didn't yet know had ruled the darkness for 400 years, I felt something crack open inside my chest. Something that had been sealed since the night Jonah stopped breathing.
I didn't know it then.
Couldn't have known it, but that crack would be my undoing. Or my salvation. I hadn't yet decided which. 1 week passed. I told myself it meant nothing. Rich people were often entitled. I had put him in his place. He had left without another word, his wounded hand wrapped in gauze that he probably had some private physician redo the moment he walked out of my emergency room. End of story. Except, I started seeing him everywhere. Not in ways I could complain about. Not in ways that crossed any line I could name. He was simply present. A shadow at the edge of my peripheral vision that I couldn't quite shake. The first time, I spotted him in the waiting room at 3 a.m, sitting in one of those uncomfortable plastic chairs like he belonged there. He was reading a book, the leather binding so old it was crumbling at the edges, the pages yellowed with what looked like centuries of handling. He didn't look up when I walked past. Didn't acknowledge me at all. But I felt his attention like a hand pressed against my spine. The second time, I heard the charge nurse gossiping about an anonymous donation. New blood bank equipment. State of the art. The exact upgrade I'd been begging administration for since last spring. The one they kept telling me wasn't in the budget. The third time, it was nursing scholarships. 3 of them. Full tuition for night shift nurses pursuing advanced degrees. The specific program I'd mentioned in the break room 2 weeks ago, frustrated that brilliant women were trapped in entry-level positions because they couldn't afford to go back to school. The fourth time, it was flowers. They appeared at the nurse's station on a Tuesday night, not roses, nothing so obvious. Night-blooming jasmine, impossibly fragrant, the kind of flower that had no business existing in Providence in January. No card. No explanation. Just beauty materializing out of the darkness, like a confession no one had asked for. Someone has an admirer, Vivian said, nudging my shoulder as we stared at the blooms. She'd been my closest friend at the hospital for 8 years, the kind of woman who noticed everything and said most of it out loud. A wealthy admirer, by the looks of it. Jasmine in winter? That's not Trader Joe's money. Don't be ridiculous, I said. But I took one of the flowers home. I told myself it was because it would die otherwise. I told myself it meant nothing when I put it in a glass of water on my nightstand, in the spot where Jonah's reading lamp used to sit. I told myself a lot of things that week. The hardest thing to admit was that I'd started looking for him. My eyes would scan the waiting room when I clocked in, searching for that impossible stillness, that predatory grace. My pulse would jump when I saw a tall figure in an expensive coat, then settle into something uncomfortably close to disappointment when it turned out to be someone else. I was 38 years old. I knew what this was. I knew the shape of wanting something you shouldn't want, the particular cruelty of desire when you're old enough to understand what it costs. I had buried this part of myself with Jonah, packed it away like winter clothes I never intended to wear again. But it was stirring now, and I didn't know how to make it stop. The night everything shifted, I found him in the chapel. Rhode Island Hospital had a 24-hour interfaith space, a small room with soft lighting and uncomfortable pews where families waited during surgeries, where people came to pray or bargain, or simply sit with their grief. I went there sometimes, during the quiet hours between 3 and 4 a.m., when the weight of my shift felt heaviest. I didn't expect to find him there. He stood before the small altar, his back to me, utterly still. The candlelight caught the sharp angles of his profile, and for a moment he looked less like a man and more like something carved from marble and shadow. Something ancient. Something that belonged in cathedrals, not hospital chapels. "Are you praying?" I asked. I don't know why I didn't just leave. I don't know why I spoke at all. "I'm remembering," he said. His voice was different in the quiet, softer, rougher, stripped to the arrogance I'd heard before. Someone I lost. A very long time ago. The words hit me somewhere I'd stopped protecting. Against every instinct screaming at me to walk away, I sat down in one of the pews. We talked. Carefully at first, like two people circling something they're not sure they want to find. He asked about my work, and I found myself telling him things I never told anyone. Not Vivian, not the therapist I'd stopped seeing years ago, not even the journal I kept beside my bed and never wrote in. I told him about the children I couldn't save. The ones whose faces I still saw when I closed my eyes. I told him about the families I'd held together with nothing but my presence. How sometimes all you could do is stand in the doorway of a room where someone was dying and refuse to let them die alone. I told him that I'd chosen this life. The blood, the exhaustion, the endless parade of other people's tragedies, because it was the only way I knew to make Jonah's death mean something. I didn't say Jonah's name, but Curtis heard the shape of the absence anyway. You carry someone with you, he said, those amber eyes fixed on my face with an intensity that should have frightened me. Someone who left before you were ready. Doesn't everyone?
No.
He leaned forward, and the candlelight caught something in his expression that looked almost like recognition. Almost like pain. Most people learn to set down their dead, Layla. You've made yours into armor. I should have been offended. I should have stood up and walked out and never spoken to this stranger again. Instead, I felt something crack. Just slightly. Just enough to let the cold air in. Maybe armor is the only thing keeping me upright. Curtis was quiet for a long moment. The candles flickered. Somewhere in the hospital, a machine beeped, a door closed, a life continued without knowing we were here in this small room having a conversation that would ruin everything. Perhaps, he finally said, but armor doesn't let you feel anything. His voice dropped, soft as a confession. And I think you're tired of not feeling. I left before I could say something I'd regret. But his words followed me home. Into my empty apartment. Into my sleepless night. Into the place on my bed where I still slept on the right side 15 years after there stopped being a reason to leave room for anyone else. Armor doesn't let you feel anything. I lay in the dark and thought about Jonah. About the way he used to trace patterns on my back when I couldn't sleep. About the last words he ever said to me. Don't disappear, Layla. Promise me you won't disappear. I had promised. And then I had broken that promise in every way that mattered. I was in trouble. I knew I was in trouble. This man, this cold, strange, impossible man, had seen through me in a single conversation. Had named the thing I'd spent 15 years hiding from everyone, including myself. And the worst part? I wanted to see him again. I wanted him to look at me with those ancient eyes and tell me more true things I wasn't ready to hear. I wanted, and the wanting terrified me more than he ever could. Because I knew that this feeling was the most dangerous thing in the world. Not because of what he might do to me, but because of what I might let him. The walls came down slowly. Then, all at once. It started with coffee. The all-night diner on Westminster Street, the one with the cracked vinyl booths and the waitress who'd been working the graveyard shift since before I was born. Curtis was waiting for me when I clocked out at 4 a.m., standing in the pool of light from the diner's neon sign like he'd been there forever. Like he'd wait forever, if that's what it took. You shouldn't be here, I said. And yet. He held the door open. Here I am. I should have walked away. I should have gone home to my empty apartment and my empty bed and the empty space where Jonah used to exist. Instead, I sat across from him in a booth by the window, watching steam rise from a cup of coffee I didn't remember ordering, and I let myself fall. We started meeting after every shift. Never inside the hospital. That felt too real, too official, too much like something I'd have to explain to people who would never understand. Always at the edges. The diner. The bench by the Providence River where the city grew quiet enough to hear yourself think. The stone steps of the old library at 3 a.m. when the streets belonged only to us and the ghosts we carried. He told me fragments of himself, pieces that didn't quite fit together into anything I could hold. He was older than he appeared. Much older, though when I pressed him on it, he smiled in a way that made me stop asking. He was involved in local governance. I assumed politics, old money, the kind of quiet power that didn't need to announce itself. He had lived alone for longer than I could imagine.
Decades, he said.
Longer, his eyes said. He spoke of loss with the weariness of someone who had experienced it not once, not twice, but so many times that grief had become a language he spoke fluently. A native tongue. "Everyone I've cared about," he said one night, staring out at the black water of the river. "I've outlived." It becomes a particular kind of loneliness. Knowing that connection means eventual loss. That loving anything is just agreeing to watch it leave. I understood that more than I wanted to admit. And in return, against every instinct I'd spent 15 years building, I told him about Jonah. The words came slowly at first, like water through a crack in a dam. Then faster. Then all at once, a flood. I couldn't stop if I'd wanted to. I told him how we met in nursing school. How Jonah was the first person who ever made me laugh so hard I forgot to be afraid. How he had this way of looking at me that made me feel like I was the most interesting thing in any room, even when I was exhausted and covered in other people's blood and certain I had nothing left to give. I told him how Jonah proposed on a Tuesday afternoon. Nothing special, just the two of us sitting on the fire escape of our terrible apartment eating cold pizza. How he said, "I want to spend every ordinary day with you until ordinary feels like magic." I told him how Jonah got sick. The words caught in my throat. I hadn't spoken them aloud in 15 years. Not to Vivian, not to the grief counselor the hospital assigned me, not to anyone. I had locked them inside myself like something dangerous, something that would destroy me if I let it out. But Curtis sat across from me in the pre-dawn darkness, his ancient eyes patient, his impossible stillness somehow making it easier to breathe, and I told him everything. How it started with fatigue, then bruising, then blood tests that made no sense, specialists who shook their heads, a diagnosis that was really just an admission of failure. Unknown blood disorder, 'cause undetermined, prognosis uncertain. How he died in the same hospital where I work now. The same floor. I requested the night shift specifically because it was the shift he died on. As if keeping vigil in that fluorescent purgatory could somehow undo what couldn't be undone. As if proximity to the place where I lost him could bring him back. I held his hand until it went cold. I whispered. And then I held it longer. Because I didn't know how to let go. I still don't know. Curtis was silent for a long moment. The river moved past us, dark and indifferent. "You've been dying with him ever since," he finally said. "In all the ways that matter." The words should have hurt. They did hurt, a sharp, precise pain like a surgeon's knife cutting away something that had grown wrong inside me. Maybe. I met his eyes. Or maybe I've just been waiting. For what? I thought about it. Really thought for the first time in 15 years. I don't know. Something that makes the living feel worth the cost. He looked at me then with an expression I couldn't read. Hunger, yes, I'd seen that from the beginning. But something else too. Something that looked almost like hope. "And if you found it," he asked quietly, "would you be brave enough to take it?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. He kissed me that night, in the shadow of the old stone bridge where the Providence River meets the bay. His lips were cold, impossibly cold, cold in a way that should have frightened me, cold in a way that made something deep in my brain whisper warnings I couldn't quite hear. But the kiss. The kiss ignited something I thought died with Jonah. A hunger I'd buried so deep I'd forgotten it existed. The particular wanting of a woman who knows what she's lost and is terrified to want anything again, but wants anyway. Wants despite. Wants because. I kissed him back. I kissed him like a woman who had finally decided to stop surviving and start living. I kissed him like Jonah was watching from somewhere and telling me it was okay, it was finally okay. I was allowed to come back to life. And deep in the oldest part of my brain, the part that remembers what humans used to know about the dark, the part that made our ancestors lock their doors and salt their windows and whisper prayers against things that hunted in the night, a warning rose.
Run.
Run now. He's not what he seems. He's not even close to what he seems. And if you stay, if you let yourself feel this, you will lose everything you have left. I heard it. I ignored it. Because the terrible truth, the truth I was only beginning to understand, was that I had already lost everything that mattered. Jonah was gone. My heart was gone. The woman I used to be had died in a hospital room 15 years ago, holding a cold hand and refusing to accept what she already knew. What did I have left to lose? So I stayed. I let Curtis pull me closer, let his cold arms wrap around me, let myself pretend for one beautiful moment that I wasn't standing on the edge of an abyss I couldn't see the bottom of. I stayed. And that, as they say, was the beginning of the end. 2 weeks of impossible happiness. That's what I had. 14 days of stolen hours between my shifts and his mysterious obligations. 14 nights of feeling like I'd finally woken up from a 15-year sleep. 14 mornings of going home with his cold kiss still burning on my lips, feeling more alive than I had any right to feel. Curtis looked at me like I was the most fascinating thing he'd encountered in lifetimes. Not beautiful. I'd never been that, and 38 years in grief had made sure of it. But fascinating. Like I was a puzzle he'd been waiting centuries to solve. Like I was worth studying, worth knowing, worth keeping. His touch was always cold. I'd stopped questioning it, the same way I'd stopped questioning why he never ate when we met at the diner, why I only ever saw him after dark, why his skin never warmed no matter how long I held him. Some part of me knew. Some part of me had always known. But I wasn't ready to name it. Naming it would make it real. The truth found me anyway. It started with a patient, an elderly man brought in for what looked like severe anemia. Nothing remarkable on the surface. But when I pulled up his records, my blood went cold. The same symptoms. The same impossible test results. The same mysterious blood disorder that no specialist could explain. The same thing that killed Jonah. I told myself it was coincidence. I almost believed it. But something made me dig deeper. Old files. Historical records. Phone calls to colleagues who'd worked Jonah's case, retired now, happy to talk to someone who remembered. I followed patterns I shouldn't have been able to see, connections that shouldn't have existed. What I found turned my blood to ice. There had been others. Dozens over the past 50 years in Providence alone. All with the same impossible symptoms. All dying of what appeared to be untreatable blood disorders. And all of them, every single one, descended from specific family lines that trace back to colonial Rhode Island. Families who, according to records I found in the Historical Society's archives, were once known for one thing: hunting vampires. I didn't believe it. Couldn't believe it. The word felt absurd even thinking it, like something from a fairy tale, like something that couldn't possibly exist in a world of fluorescent lights and medical charts and evidence-based practice. But I ran the DNA comparison anyway. I used the hospital's resources in ways that could have cost me my license. I compared my own genetics to the patterns I'd found in those old records. I searched for the markers that connected all those deaths across decades. I matched. Jonah had matched too. And when I dug into the deaths, truly dug, following paper trails and digital footprints and patterns that should have been invisible, I found something that shattered everything I thought I knew. These weren't natural deaths. They weren't medical mysteries or unfortunate coincidences or failures of modern medicine. They were murders. Systematic. Coordinated. Deliberate. Someone had been hunting the hunters for generations. Eliminating bloodlines. Erasing families from existence. Including my husband. The night I confronted Curtis, Providence was wrapped in freezing rain. I met him on the rooftop of my apartment building, neutral ground, I told myself, though nothing about this could be neutral anymore. He arrived silently, the way he always did, materializing from shadows like he'd been part of them all along. I know what you are. He went still. That predator stillness I'd learned to recognize, the absolute absence of movement that no living thing could achieve. And I know what your people did to Jonah. I told him everything. The research, the patterns, the systematic slaughter of hunter bloodlines over decades. My husband, my beautiful, laughing, ordinary husband, murdered because of DNA he didn't even know he carried. Curtis didn't deny it, but his face, his ancient, marble-carved face, showed something I didn't expect. Genuine anguish.
Real pain.
The kind of grief I recognized because I'd been wearing it for 15 years. The standing orders were issued 300 years before I became king. Before I was even turned. His voice was rough, cracked. I didn't know about Jonah. I swear to you, Layla. I didn't know. But you upheld the system. My voice broke. You maintained the laws that made his death inevitable. Yes. And you've known what I am. This whole time. The betrayal hit me fresh, a wound I didn't know I could still receive. You knew my blood marked me for death, and you what? Thought you'd seduce me first? Have a little fun before your people finish the job? I thought I'd protect you. He moved toward me and I flinched back. He stopped immediately, pain flashing across his features. From the moment I scented your blood, I knew what you were, what the law required me to do. And I couldn't, his voice cracked. I wouldn't let them have you. Not you.
Why?
Because I'm a curiosity? Because I'm the first person in 400 years who didn't bow to you. Because you made me remember what it felt like to be human. I laughed, and the sound that came out was something tearing. Something dying. You're not human, Curtis. You're the king of the monsters who killed my husband. Yes.
He didn't argue.
Didn't defend. Just accepted it, like a man accepting a sentence he knew he deserved. I am exactly that. The silence between us was heavy with everything I wanted to say. The accusations. The grief. The betrayal of having finally let myself love again, only to discover it was built on bones. I could kill you, I whispered. Apparently it's in my blood. You could try. His amber eyes were soft. Resigned. I wouldn't stop you. But I didn't move. Because standing there, looking at this creature who had done monstrous things, I saw something else too. A man who was tired. A king who had never wanted to be king. Someone who had lived so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to want something real.
Until me.
And that made everything worse. I can't do this, I said finally. I can't love the thing that destroyed my life. I know. I walked to the roof access door. Paused with my hand on the handle. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Don't come back, Curtis. Don't come to the hospital. Don't send flowers. Don't. My voice broke completely. Don't make me see you again. As you wish. I descended into my building, locked my apartment door, slid down against it until I was sitting on the cold floor. And then I cried. For the first time in 15 years, I cried. Not the quiet, controlled tears I allowed myself on Jonah's anniversary. Not the brief burning behind my eyes that I always blinked away. Real tears. The ugly kind. The kind that come from somewhere so deep you didn't know it existed until it breaks open. I cried for Jonah. I cried for the 15 years I'd wasted being dead while my heart kept beating. I cried for the 2 weeks of happiness I'd let myself believe I deserved. And I cried for the truth I couldn't escape, that somewhere in those stolen hours, in those cold kisses, in those ancient eyes that saw me like I was worth seeing, I had fallen in love with a monster. And losing him hurt almost as much as losing Jonah. Almost. 3 weeks of silence. Curtis vanished from Providence like he'd never existed at all. The donations to the hospital stopped. The flowers stopped. The feeling of being watched, which I hadn't realized was also the feeling of being protected, disappeared completely. I should have been relieved. Instead, I felt the absence like a missing limb, like waking up and reaching for something that wasn't there anymore. Like the weeks after Jonah died, when I kept turning to tell him things before remembering there was no one left to tell. I threw myself into work. Double shifts. Extra patience. Anything to exhaust myself enough to sleep without dreaming. Vivian asked if I was okay, and I lied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I'd become very good at lying over the years. 15 years of practice will do that to a person. I told myself I was fine. I told myself this was what I wanted. Safety, solitude, the familiar numbness I'd mistaken for peace. I told myself I didn't miss him. I lied about that too. Then, one night, a woman appeared in the ER waiting room. She was pale in a way that had nothing to do with illness. ageless in a way that made my skin prickle with recognition. Her clothes suggested money and centuries of practice at intimidation, silk and leather, and the kind of quiet confidence that came from knowing you were the most dangerous thing in any room. "Layla Hutchinson," she said. "Not a question. Who's asking?" "My name is Irina." Her accent was Eastern European and ancient, like something preserved in amber. "And I've come to deliver a message." She sat across from me in the waiting room, ignoring the curious stares of the night staff, and spoke words that shattered what was left of my carefully constructed walls. "Your king is going to die." My blood went cold. "He's not my king." "No." Irina's ancient eyes held something that might have been amusement. "Then why are you shaking?" I looked down. My hands were trembling against my thighs. Irina explained everything. Curtis had invoked sanctuary to protect me, a unilateral decision that violated 400 years of covenant law. When the other coven leaders discovered the depth of his attachment, discovered that he'd allowed a hunter descendant to live, they'd called for blood tribunal. The sentence was death. "He went willingly," Irina said. "Did not fight. Did not argue." When they asked him why he protected you, do you know what he said? "I couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe." He said, "Because she made me want to be worthy of defiance." The words hit me like a physical blow. I heard them in his voice, that low, cultured voice that had whispered secrets against my hair, that had spoken my name like it was something precious, something worth protecting. Worthy of defiance. Irina left an address.
A date, a time, and a choice.
The tribunal allows the accused to name a witness. Curtis refused to name you. He said he wouldn't risk your life for his. She stood, smoothing her silk blouse. "But I am overriding his wishes. If you come, you might save him. If you stay away." She paused at the door. "He dies knowing you were safe. Perhaps that's enough for him." I spent the next day in agony. This creature was a monster. His people killed Jonah. I owed him nothing, less than nothing. Walking into a room full of vampires was suicide. Choosing Curtis meant choosing to forgive something that should be unforgivable.
But
she made me want to be worthy of defiance. I thought about what it meant to be worthy of something. I thought about Jonah and how he'd spent our entire marriage making me feel like I was worthy of love, worthy of happiness, worthy of being seen. I thought about the 15 years I'd spent believing his death had taken that worthiness with him. And I thought about Curtis, about the way he looked at me like I mattered, about the way he'd chosen my life over his kingdom, his safety, his 400 years of careful survival. He was a monster, but he was a monster who loved me. And I was tired, so tired, of letting the people I loved die alone. I went anyway. The tribunal was held beneath the old Biltmore Hotel, in chambers that appeared on no architectural plans. I descended into stone corridors lit by flames that cast no smoke, surrounded by creatures whose eyes tracked me like prey. My blood pounded in my ears. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. But I kept walking. Curtis was on his knees in the center of a vast chamber, chains around his wrists. Silver, I realized from the way his skin blistered where they touched. His amber eyes widened when he saw me. "Layla."
no.
"You shouldn't." Silence. The vampire who spoke was ancient in a way that made Curtis look young. A child. "The witness will address the tribunal." I stood before creatures who could kill me between heartbeats. I felt my blood pounding, felt something ancient stirring in my DNA. The genetic memory of what I was. A hunter. A killer of monsters. The last of a line that once nearly drove these beings to extinction. And I made a choice. I'm told that by your laws, I should be dead. My voice was steady.
I didn't know how.
I'm told that Curtis committed treason by letting me live. And I'm told that the only way to prove I'm not a threat is to destroy me or destroy him. I pulled up my sleeve, exposing my wrist. The pale skin where my pulse beat visible, vulnerable. I'm offering a third option. The tribunal stirred. Curtis strained against his chains. "Layla, don't. I offer my blood willingly." I spoke over him, holding the Ancient One's gaze. Not in surrender. Not in defeat. But in choice. I am a hunter by blood but not by action. I have never harmed your kind. And the man kneeling before you, the king you're about to execute, he showed me that even monsters can choose to be something else. I crossed to Curtis, knelt before him on the cold stone floor, took his face in my hands, that beautiful, terrible face I'd tried so hard to forget. You let me live when every law told you to kill me. You protected me from your own people. You gave up your kingdom for a woman who told you to leave her alone. My voice broke. I don't know if I can forgive what your people did to Jonah. I don't know if I can stop grieving him long enough to love you the way you deserve. But I know I'm not willing to let you die without trying. I press my wrist to his lips.
Drink.
Take my blood, and let them see that a hunter and a king can choose something other than war. Curtis hesitated. His amber eyes searched mine, looking for doubt, for fear, for any sign that I didn't mean it. He found none. Then, gently, reverently, he bit. The blood communion lasted only seconds. But in that moment, I felt something shift. In myself. In Curtis. In the fabric of laws that had governed our kinds for centuries. Something ancient breaking. Something new being born. When Curtis released my wrist, the Ancient One spoke. This has never been done. A hunter offering blood to a king. A king accepting mercy instead of demanding submission. Those unreadable eyes studied us both. You have broken every covenant that exists between our peoples. I stood, swaying slightly from blood loss. Good. Maybe they needed breaking. A long silence. Then, impossibly, the Ancient One laughed. Remove the king's chains. The tribunal finds no precedent for this situation. We cannot execute a man for a crime when the victim refuses to be victimized. Curtis rose. His wrists were healing already, the silver burns fading. He caught me before I could collapse, lifting me like I weighed nothing. You impossible woman, he breathed against my hair. You magnificent, stubborn, impossible woman. Just get me out of here, I whispered, before I faint and ruin the dramatic exit. 1 month later. I still work nights at Rhode Island Hospital. Some things don't change, shouldn't change. I became a nurse because I wanted to protect people who couldn't protect themselves, and that purpose didn't disappear just because I fell in love with a vampire king. If anything, it matters more now. I've seen both worlds. I know how fragile life really is. I know how precious every ordinary moment becomes when you understand exactly how easily it can be taken away. But other things are different now. I wake at dusk instead of dawn. My apartment has blackout curtains thick enough to keep the sunrise from disturbing the man who sleeps beside me. Curtains I hung myself, laughing at the absurdity of it, at the impossible domesticity of making a home with a 400-year-old creature of the night. I have learned the geography of Curtis's scars. The ones that healed smooth and silver. The ones that didn't heal at all, that remain as permanent reminders of battles fought before my great-great-grandmother was born. Centuries of violence written on his immortal flesh. I trace them sometimes, in the quiet hours before my shift, memorizing the history of a man who has lived longer than I can truly comprehend. I still grieve Jonah. I suspect I always will. But grief and love, I'm learning, aren't mutually exclusive. They can exist in the same heart without destroying each other. I can hold both, the memory of the man who taught me what love meant and the reality of the man who is teaching me what it means to choose love anyway. To love despite. To love knowing. I keep a photograph of Jonah on my nightstand. Curtis has never asked me to remove it. The first time he saw it, he simply looked at the laughing face of my husband and said, he had kind eyes. He did, I said. He was the kindest person I ever knew. Then I owe him a debt, Curtis replied quietly, for making you someone capable of seeing kindness in creatures like me. The vampire world hasn't fully accepted me. I suspect it never will. I am a hunter by blood, an anomaly, a living reminder of wars they thought they'd won. Some of them look at me with barely concealed hatred, others with curiosity. A few, the oldest ones, the ones who remember what it was like before the hunter bloodlines were nearly extinguished, look at me with something almost like respect. But I have standing now. A position that exists because I created it, because I walked into a tribunal and offered my blood instead of my surrender. Mortal consort to the king. Hunter by blood, healer by choice. A walking contradiction in a world that hates contradictions. I've always been good at being underestimated. Now I'm learning to use it. Some nights, Curtis and I walk along the Providence River. The same path where he first kissed me. The same stones where I decided to stop surviving and start living. The water moves past us, dark and indifferent, and he tells me about the centuries he's lived. The wars he's fought. The loneliness that nearly hollowed him out before I arrived in his emergency room with my exhausted eyes and my stubborn fury. I was ready to die, he admits one night. The words come quietly, almost casually, like a man describing the weather. Not dramatically. Not with intention. But I had stopped caring whether I continued. 400 years of existence and none of it meant anything anymore. I was just persisting. Going through the motions of power because I didn't know how to stop. I squeeze his hand. His cold fingers interlock with mine, familiar now.
Cherished.
And then you pointed your finger at my face, he continues, and told me I didn't dare raise my voice at you. And you found that attractive? He laughs, a real laugh, surprised out of him the way I've learned to do. I found it miraculous. You reminded me that existence without defiance isn't existence at all. It's just endurance. I think about that. About all the years I spent enduring instead of living. About the armor I built from grief, and the way Curtis saw through it anyway. Saw the woman underneath who was so tired of being protected, so tired of being numb, so tired of surviving in a life that had stopped feeling like hers. I don't know how this ends, I say. The words have been sitting in my chest for weeks, heavy and unspoken. I'm mortal. You're not. Eventually isn't now. His lips brush my forehead, cold and gentle. And I've learned that now is the only thing any of us truly have. Mortal or immortal. 400 years or 40. I look up at the Providence skyline. This city that has become the unlikely seat of vampire power. This place where my husband died and my second life began. This impossible, ordinary, terrifying, beautiful place where I learned that loving a monster didn't make me monstrous. It made me brave. I'm scared, I admit. The words are easier now than they used to be. Of losing you. Of losing myself. Of becoming something I won't recognize. I know. Curtis's arms tighten around me. But you're not the woman who walked into that tribunal anymore, Layla. You're not even the woman who told me off in the emergency room. You've transformed. And transformation is terrifying. But he smiles. The real smile, the one I had to earn, the one that makes him look almost human, the one that belongs only to me. But you've already proven you can survive terrifying things. And I've already proven I'll stand beside you while you do. I lean into him, this ancient creature who commands legions and kneels for no one. Accept me. Always accept me. And I think, this isn't a fairy tale. There's no happily ever after. There's only this moment and this man, and this choice to keep choosing him. It's not enough. It's everything. There are other women like me. I know that now. Women who walked into darkness because something in them recognized it. Women who found that the most terrifying thing wasn't the monster, it was how badly they wanted to stay. If this story found you, if something in it made you feel less alone in the wanting, then maybe there are other stories waiting for you here. Other women. Other choices. Other nights when everything changed. They're easy to miss if you let them slip away. But something tells me you're not the kind of woman who lets things slip away. Not anymore.